Welcome everyone to this afternoon session on how do we create carbon conscious places. I'm Heather Claridge and I'm your chair for this afternoon. This is session 2 of a week-long conference where we've been focusing on working with climate change in mind. For those of you who couldn't make yesterday's session, we heard from David Mallon from Scottish Government, who gave us an update on the climate change plan, which is due to be published in December 2020. And he gave some insight into the changes that have been made due to the pandemic. After David, we heard from Vincent Onyago from the University of Dundee, who discussed his research for the Scottish Government and the importance of cooperation and coordinating practices, policy and activity and the skills planners need. And then after Vincent, we heard from Gemma Jerome from Building with Nature, who discussed their tool and its use by developers, but also local development plans. So it's fair to say session 1 set the bar pretty high in terms of interesting presentations. But this afternoon we've got 3 presentations from 5 speakers, so I'll go on to introduce them. But just before that, just to tell you some things, we'll hear from all the presentations first, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. You can submit your questions through the question box, and you can do that throughout the presentation. So we'd encourage you to keep those questions up, and we'll try and get through as many as possible in the questions at the end. We would also love it if you could use the hashtag #PipClimateWebinars and use that through the session to tell us what you thought about it. So moving on to the presentations for this afternoon. First up, we have Steve Malone and myself, and we're going to be presenting on caring carbon conscious places. Steve is a principal architect at Architecture and Design Scotland, and I'm a principal planner and designer on secondment from Glasgow City Council. After us, we'll hear from Ailey Callan and Angela Burke from SEPA. They're presenting on circular economy conducive places. Ailey is a senior planning officer who deals with commercial and public premises, and Angela is the housing sector lead and senior planning officer. And last but not least, we'll hear from Ian Gosine from the Scottish Government, who's presenting on 20-minute neighbourhoods. And Ian is, of course, our Chief Architect for Scotland. So without further ado, I'll ask Steve to share his presentation. You've got it.
Okay.
Brilliant. So we're going to do it as a double act, so you'll have to bear with us for this. So to start off with, imagining what 2050 might look like is a challenge, even for people working in the built environment. However, what we do know is we would want them to look like the places we would want to live ourselves. Greener, sociable, with more opportunities to lead independent and healthier lives. The current COVID pandemic has brought into sharp focus the need for higher quality and more resilient places. It's demonstrated what places could look like when the streets are reclaimed for people, traffic reduces, and there's more local custom. However, the pandemic's also exposed existing place deficiencies in our neighbourhood, disconnected from people, carbon intensive, and a lack of critical services and poor quality of environment. Yet we were already living in an era of emergencies before COVID, and it's the health and climate crisis which Architecture and Design Scotland have been exploring to understand how we can use these challenges and utilise them as drivers for positive change.
So to set some context, we know there are major issues highlighted around an ageing population. It's both a global and a local issue. And in Scotland, the number of people aged 75 and over is projected to increase by 85% over the next 25 years. And this ageing is happening at a faster rate than the rest of the UK. And in Scotland, that will be more prevalent in our towns and our rural areas.
And when we turn to the climate, in the same period as Steve mentioned, we have ambitious targets to be a net zero carbon society. And this means balancing the carbon emitted with the carbon that we offset or absorb. And in the meantime, our climate is changing, so we also need to adapt. Scotland as a whole is 20% wetter than it was 50 years ago, and it's looked like it's projected to get wetter, warmer, with more extreme weather events. Next slide. So when we think about how we can support placemaking to get to the 2050 that allows us to support the ageing, the vulnerable, and everybody else to live and live well, we saw a great opportunity to combine our recent work from caring places and carbon conscious places and see how this can support a green recovery.
So in March last year, we published our report on town centre living a caring place. And the report explores how our town centres can be more supportive environments to live in, with a particular focus on ageing and the provision of care. And it looks at what the essential components might be for creating more caring communities and how we can use our town centres more effectively by building on the existing assets of a place. So within that report, we suggest 10 principles to consider around care and place, with the overarching principle of placing user needs at the heart of decision making, service provision, and investment in our places. And these include things like providing friendly and accessible transport that's efficient, cost effective, and encourages social interaction, with initiatives like Cycling Without Age Scotland, which connects people with an interest in cycling with people in care settings who are socially isolated in their own homes, enabling them to explore the local area and feel part of the wider community. Providing inclusive networks and spaces that support intergenerational interaction, with barrier-free spaces like Colwyn Square in Helensburgh, which is designed with accessible seating, wide pavements, and accessible shared surfaces promoting outdoor activity. Creating pleasant walkable places supported by technology, services, and the community, supported by services like Neatbox, which is a company based in Scotland who've developed mobile apps that help foster independence and increase social mobility. Developing intelligent systems that optimize the use of latent space and services, with examples like Clever Clogs, which is developed by Blackwood Homes, which gives care and support staff live up-to-date rotas, care notes, preferences, and instructions, and which also interacts with the customer's home to allow residents to lower and raise blinds, turn lights on and off, and open and close doors and windows. And also transforming failing spaces and buildings by considering opportunities for reuse and repurposing.
So in 2019, Architecture and Design Scotland were also approached by Scottish Government through the Energy and Climate Change Directorate to help implement the climate change plan at a local level. This was in a real recognition that the planning system plays a key role in tackling climate change and helping Scotland achieve those carbon emission targets. We did a call out to local authorities to see if they were interested in the project, and we selected 4 to work with for a year to help develop and deliver plans that prioritise climate action. And from this work, we were able to identify 8 key principles to support more carbon conscious placemaking. Some of these include a place-led approach, using the right type of intervention at the right stage, scale and location. A place of small distances, encouraging the creation of complete and self-sufficient neighbourhoods with everyday facilities and services within a short walking or cycling distance. A place that designs for and with local people, involving placing people's needs at the centre of decision-making, service provision, investment in our places, and ensuring they are actively involved in key stages of the design process. A place with whole and circular systems, involving enhancing, repairing, and joining up different systems with healthy carbon-conscious places. And a place that supports sharing, encouraging sharing of assets, services in a place to enable lower carbon living that connects people with their neighbourhoods. So ultimately, these support the combination of reducing, repurposing, and absorbing carbon and adapting to the impacts of climate change. Many of these neatly cross over and link with the principles identified in the earlier work of Caring Places report. And this shows the great potential to both deliver carbon and social benefits if we consider a whole place approach. Next slide. Great. So what we both did was consider how these principles might apply at different scales and through different themes. And through this, we were able to consider different ways to address all scopes of carbon emissions and the impacts of climate change, and also help facilitate places that can support longer, more independent lifestyles. So we're going to take you on a journey where we're going to zoom in and out of places and explore what changes might need to happen to support more carbon caring conscious places in Scotland over the next 30 years. So through this, we are going to explore ways we rethink streets, spaces, buildings, neighbourhoods, making the best use of public resources, redesigning how and where services are provided, and facilitating behaviour change, and overall really reflecting the Scottish Government's place principle. So the first scale that we consider is our towns. This has been incrementally transformed to support greater self-sufficiency through local food growing. Vacant buildings have been retained and refurbished as local businesses and touchdown spaces. Upstream natural flood defences have allowed the river to be used as a quality open space for recreation and movement. These interventions have helped the town to sustain its population and be a desirable place to live.
So the housing infrastructure connected into the town centre by quality walking routes and accessible public transport has allowed more caring and supportive environments to live in as we grow older, with easier access to services, public transport and community activity. Intergenerational housing that offers choice in terms of typology, location and resident connectivity helps to provide settings for support and places where generations look after each other. The technology-enabled housing provides things like adaptable and flexible spaces with plenty of natural light and direct links to outdoors, communal social spaces for shared activity, a community garden and growing spaces, and attractive sheltered spaces to sit.
And at a rural centre, peatland and woodland restoration has helped the area absorb carbon and balance emissions. A high quality, regular and reliable public transport and active travel links connect the area to the surrounding settlements. Local food growing and local food production helps the community to be more self-sufficient. And the ground floor shops and buildings double up to offer local services such as early years education, health facilities and community uses.
So repurposing and refurbishing empty buildings within the rural centre has helped to create space that invites greater participation across generations for the local area, with combined provision of services to connect and support communities with things like community libraries, local business hubs, and flexible outdoor spaces for programmed use by different groups throughout the day.
And zooming up to an urban neighbourhood, the existing tenements have been renovated and to provide energy efficient living and healthier indoor environments. Redundant garages, lockups provide workshops for local residents and creative enterprises. Vehicle access is limited to key zero emission vehicles such as local buses, delivery vans and emergency services, and those residents with additional mobility needs. Street trees enhance the streetscape, providing shade and shelter and a home for nature, and rain gardens and swales create playful street features, helping to slow, store and clean water.
Green infrastructure within the urban neighbourhood provides barrier-free intergenerational public spaces with programmes of activity to connect communities, providing community allotments, cafes, outdoor seating and accessible public toilets and space for outdoor learning, linked to the neighbourhood centre by quality walking, wheeling and cycling routes and accessible public transport.
And finally, zooming up to the city centre scale, building facades have been retrofitted with living green walls to help with urban cooling, carbon absorption and reducing energy consumption. Rooftops have been utilised for on-site generation of electricity and heat, and areas have been set aside for green space and room for urban growing. Active travel and public transport are prioritised with good access to transport and digital networks.
And integrated transport and digital infrastructure within the city centre provides better physical and digital connectivity to enable people to get to where they need and or want to be, and to know what's happening where and when, and to communicate with service providers more easily. An active travel hub bringing together rail, bus, cycle and pedestrian modes of transport is accessible via at-grade roads and pavements and linked into the wider city centre through tech-enabled signage as part of a connected network. So we're working with different local authorities to apply the principles developed in both our caring places and our carbon conscious places work on the ground. This is an example in Clackmannanshire where we're supporting the council in the development of a brief for a mixed use housing site in Alva Town Centre as part of a Pathfinder project on housing-led town centre regeneration with Scottish Futures Trust. So through engagement with the community and key stakeholders, we're using the principles to help guide development on the site within the wider context of the town and to develop concept illustrations that apply the principles in a real place. So thanks for listening. For more information, you can download both the reports, which are available on our website, and other related material. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, I will thank you, Steve. I won't thank myself. That was a great, hopefully, opening presentation to this kind of theme around how do we create places that are more carbon conscious. Next up, we're going to hear from Angela and Ailey about the circular economy and place scale. So hopefully we've teed you up for some good links. So do you want to share your screen now? You've got it up, brilliant. So I'll let you go.
Okay, thanks very much, Heather. Ailey and I are really pleased to be here today to share our thinking about how we can design places that are conducive to the circular economy, and exactly the kind of places that you and Steve were just describing in terms of caring conscious places. So really conscious that we've only got 10 minutes, so what we're presenting is really just a bit of a flavour, the beginnings of a conversation, and we're really keen to develop our thinking on this collectively with partners. So if you've got any, if you do want to discuss this afterwards, just please get in contact for a chat. So I'm going to kick off now and explain a bit about the circular economy and how it relates to place, and then I'm going to hand over to Ailey for the second half of the presentation, who will talk us through some practical applications. So first off, if everyone lived in Scotland, would need the resources of free planets. Rethinking how we use resources and how they flow through our towns and cities is going to be a fundamental part of creating places that we need to prosper within our environmental capacity. A lot of people think of this as a resource scarcity issue, but actually we've got an abundance of materials and resources all around us. It's just that we need to look in different places and have the innovation to harness them. So the integration of circular economy approaches and planning provide a framework to do just this, and will be critical if we're going to achieve our net zero carbon society. Go to the next slide, Ailey. So our current economy is predominantly a linear one. We take resources from the ground and nature to make products, so we can think about these products as the products that we use to form the fabric of our places. We use them, and then when they're no longer needed or wanted, they're discarded, left vacant, derelict, demolished. So this inefficient use of resources has a cost, it wastes valuable energy, and it causes pollution. And it's not an accident, it's a consequence of how the decisions that we make at the design stage, where around about 80% of our environmental impacts are determined. So if we're able to change our mindset and view this inefficient use of resources as a design flaw, and actually harness the innovation and the creativity, we'll be able to design places that actually can thrive within the resources of our one planet. So as I said, Scotland's got an abundance of materials and resources, existing products in circulation, and those locked up in our built environment. The hard work's been done in a way. We've taken them out of the ground, we've extracted them, we've caused the pollution. So rather than kind of continuing that pattern, there's a really big opportunity for Scotland to capitalise on those resources, keep them in circulation at a high value for as long as possible. And it's really just important to note that we're not just talking about materials and waste. It applies to how we manage all our resources, thinking about water, materials, land, soil, buildings, infrastructure, energy, the list goes on. Next slide, Ailey. So for those of you who joined yesterday, you will have heard from David about the ambitious climate change targets Scottish Government have set, and how land use change and our built environment is going to play a really important role in helping to achieve that ambition. So globally, around 55% of our emissions come from energy. So if we just shift to low or zero carbon forms of energy, it's not going to be enough to meet the climate targets. We also really need to think creatively about how we're going to reach those harder to reach emissions that arise from how we use and manage land, water, materials in the production of buildings and other things that we use every day. The circular economy helps us solve this bit of the climate problem. We can, by designing up waste and pollution, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make sure that our natural systems are healthy and actually resilient to the impacts of climate change. By keeping assets and materials in use, we can retain the embodied energy that went into their production and make sure that the new assets and places and buildings that we're designing are actually designed to last and have that flexibility to be adapted over time to changing needs of people and climate. And finally, regenerating natural systems, working with nature, exactly like how what Gemma was talking about yesterday, things like building with nature standard, helping nature to sequester carbon and designing those places that can be resilient to the effects of climate change. Next slide. So if we're to achieve Scotland's ambition around climate, inequality, health, well-being, our places are going to need to respond. And there's a really big, as I said, there's a massive opportunity to think creatively about this. And making small changes to the way we plan and design our places now is going to help enormously when our future needs are going to respond. And I guess really, it's really just wanted to make the point that I think most of us probably can't even really imagine how our future places will need to function with products manufactured locally, demanding, reflecting demand of individual needs, resources sourced and cycled at different scales and used again and again, and the kind of infrastructure and the networks needed to enable that. But by starting to design our places now in exactly the way that Steve and Heather were just explaining, meeting the changing needs of people, designed to last, connective, healthy systems, optimizing the use of resources, and having those networks, we can make sure that our places are ready and able to respond. So yeah, the great thing is we're doing this already. We're just really not calling it the circular economy or maybe thinking about it in that context. So it's really just trying to make sure that we're actually building and capitalizing on all the great things that we're already doing in Scotland, regenerating our natural systems, green infrastructure, improving connectivity like what Ian's going to be talking about shortly, the brilliant work of Scottish Land Commission and unlocking vacant and derelict land, Scottish Zero Waste Scotland championing the circular economy, especially around buildings and construction. And as I said, I'm trying to work up those principles that Heather and Steve were just talking about. So if we can connect up all of these actions and take that place-based whole systems approach, we'll be set up to achieve what we need to achieve for people and the planet. I'll now pass over to Ailey.
Thanks, Angela. So I've seen diagrams like this one shared talking about how land is part of the circular economy, and that by planning with the circular economy lens in place and using it to set the context for new development and redevelopment, we can plan to meet the needs of existing and new populations whilst minimising the use of additional resources. But how will we actually do that? We know that planning and the planning system can be an enabler of the circular economy, but how do we actually make it happen? And how do we make it happen in a way that we want it to? So first of all, we can look at how the circular economy and circular places can be planned for on a national basis. And by integrating circular economy principles early in the planning process, we know that our planning system is going to be changed with the publication of NPF4. If you look at the high-level outcomes that the Scottish Government identified in the NPF4 call for ideas, we can see that planning for circular places will help to deliver a number of these outcomes. NPF4 policy will provide the framework for ensuring circular economy principles are integrated into new development. And this top-down approach will impact on individual sites and buildings. LDPs will also be changing, and we have the opportunity to use them to allocate or identify sites for development and using this circular economy and circular places lens. The circular economy principles can be used at all scales of development, and LDPs can incorporate these principles in spatial strategies and visions, and then when looking at where new development is needed at settlement and site level. So thinking about circular places at LDP level means that buildings and sites aren't developed in isolation, but as part of existing places, connecting to and integrating with other sites and services. So as Angela said, this is something that we already do, but we don't necessarily call it circular economy or circular places. But if one thing has been clear over the last 8 months, it's that we need to learn to be adaptable, and our places need to be adaptable too. We couldn't have known that the majority of us would be at home for such a long time or working from home. And if this continues as a way of life post-COVID, then planning will have to think about how we make sure the services we need are close to where we're living and where we're working. We need to make sure that connections can be easily made by active travel in order to minimise the need to use private transport. This means strengthening public transport and incorporating safe mobility routes for all, so not just cycling and walking, but for mobility vehicles and people of all abilities. We also have the opportunity in planning to make sure that new sites and developments are flexible and, sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So I was saying that we have the ability to make sure that new sites and developments are flexible and adaptable so that changes in our climate can be managed, thank you, without requiring interventions in the future. Designing for resilience means that we don't have to re-engineer, redesign or redevelop buildings in the future, reducing the need to use additional materials or take up additional land in order to rectify climate change impact. But how do we do this? Circular places display the characteristics associated with good urbanism. By increasing the efficiency of infrastructure, they're walkable, dense, green, with spaces to work, meet and play. They evolve over time, are lively throughout the day and are home to diverse groups of people. Reducing land needed for urban development can lead to compact settlements, which has a number of knock-on benefits, not least by being able to incorporate more public open space in urban areas, which we've definitely learned over this year is important to healthy lives and our well-being. Planning can support the decentralisation of energy supply and focusing on low and zero carbon energy sources. And reducing energy demand supports the delivery of circular places. And if we plan to maximise the use of existing services, we can also revitalise places, bringing populations back to where they used to be. So on a practical level, we can have a look at this master plan of West Edinburgh. I've just used it as a base plan without any prejudice, and we can look at what new developments could include, where development could go and how they can benefit existing places. So if we look at a number of different land uses, this can illustrate what issues planning can consider in creating a circular place. So first of all, we can see here some brownfield sites. Consider if there's existing parcels of previously used land that could be redeveloped, minimising new land that would need to be used. If we look at establishing development nodes and distribution nodes, so establishing distribution and storage hubs on key transport corridors and using electric vehicles to carry out last stage of delivery can minimise emissions and reducing the number of large vehicles on roads in towns and cities. We can also consider developing reuse hubs at these distribution nodes, so places where materials from redevelopments or deconstructions can be stored for reuse elsewhere. Having a network of these sites makes it easier for materials to stay in local economies, and it can drive down waste as well. And waste is a resource after all, and we should plan to make it easier to reuse this material. With transportation, we should be looking at mobility hubs, making sure that public transport is maximised, that it's well connected and easily accessible by all, not just, as I said before, pedestrians and bicycles, but electric vehicles, mobility vehicles, and making sure that infrastructure is in place for charging points. Joined up mobility hubs keep people connected and make sure existing populations are connected to new development and new populations can access existing services. So with shops and services, we can think about putting these where people need them, close to where they're living and working, and without needing to use transportation as much as possible. We can think about making these places adaptable too, mixing uses where shops and services use the same buildings. If we look at residential areas, should be located where they maximise existing mobility connections and improving them where possible. We can also think about design and adaptability for future needs, whether that's for children in the future, ageing populations and different needs people have over time. And also designed to minimise energy demand, maximise energy efficiency, and be designed so they can adapt to mitigate against climate change impacts. It's also important to think about whether design has minimised the natural land that would be required. Are existing green and open spaces connected to make good green and blue network links? We want to make sure that the requirement for development minimises the amount of unused and undeveloped land that's proposed for use, and also that public open space is properly planned for too. So how can SEPA help? We have been looking at embedding the circular economy into our work. We'll incorporate these principles into our own work through sector plans and cross-SEPA working. We can provide support and information through sector plans to help the development industry incorporate the circular economy principles into their corporate visions and influence organisations from boardroom down to officer level. By doing this, we will be able to view new development and redevelopment through this circular economy lens, meaning we can make opportunities to include the principles in our work and introduce them when we work with others. Early discussion through our planning engagement and raising this idea of the circular economy as part of site and development design is another way that we can help. And we can provide information to support site design to help reduce environmental impacts and create good circular places. As Angela said, this is very much an introduction, and we're really keen to work with you to develop our collective thinking on circular places. And we're really happy to be contacted for further discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for you both for presenting. There was so much in that, and I'm sure, you know, lots of takeaways. I love that circular places are good urbanism. That's just a great thing to tweet, isn't it? And I think you made a compelling case, both of you, that really demonstrates that. And I could see, as you were saying, lots of things that were chiming with the caring and carbon conscious places that we presented on. I'm sure lots of people have questions, and we would welcome you to put them in the question box, because we will have a chance at the end after we hear from Ian to go through some questions. So please put your questions in the question box. But I thank you both. And now I'll pass over to Ian, who's going to talk to us about 20-minute neighbourhoods.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay, everybody? Yeah, thanks for the invitation and opportunity to speak today about 20-minute neighbourhoods, which I think is relevant to the previous two presentations about how we respond to COVID and how we build good places, essentially. And what I'm going to do in my presentation is just describe what a 20-minute neighbourhood is, use an international example, talk about how that's fed into the programme for government that was just published, the policy perspective on that, and then finish with a local example. So I'll just move on to my first slide. So what's the 20-minute neighbourhood concept all about? It's not a new idea, but one with a new and added significance for various reasons. It's been developed in cities around the world, such as Eugene and Portland in Oregon in the USA, and in Melbourne in Australia since 2016. And the diagram on the right-hand side is an example of how Melbourne has set out the characteristics of a 20-minute neighbourhood, looking at transport, housing, recreation and green space, schools, learning, shopping, local employment and connection to transport and jobs. And I think that, as the previous speakers have talked about, we've had the lived experience of thinking about what a 20-minute neighbourhood feels like. You know, limitations on travel up to 5 miles, the need to exercise locally, quality of green spaces, access to shops, services. That's all brought into sharp focus the ability or not to live and work locally without the conventional commute. So it's all about you know, living locally and having needs accessed within a 20-minute walk from home, safe cycling and local transport options. and that in turn should have the effect of reducing commuting lengths, transport demand, and promoting local neighbourhoods. And that kind of concept of having more time rather than travelling, spending more time with friends and family whilst reducing carbon emissions is really one of the ideas that drives the 20-minute neighbourhood. And it's also something that relates to a number of policy perspectives and government priorities around place, carbon reduction, wellbeing economy, empowering communities, sustainable transport and town centre. So I'll come on to say a bit more about that later. So moving on to the next slide. So in Melbourne, since 2017, Plan Melbourne has embraced the 20-minute neighbourhood concept, all about giving people the chance to live locally and meet most of their daily needs within a 20-minute walk from home, as I've said, with access to safe cycling and local transport options. And that feeds into the Plan Melbourne's ideas about creating a livable city, a connected city, sustainable city. And the example here is of Fitzroy, which is one of the inner urban areas in Melbourne, which has mixed uses, high density, excellent connectivity, high quality public realm. This is Brunswick Street in Fitzroy. Local character, high street activity, all with it in easy walking distance. A population of about 10,500. Next slide. For a lot of Melbourne, that experience is going to be different. There's areas in Melbourne where access to those sorts of facilities in Fitzroy is not as easy to access, and you're kind of in the outer suburbs. It's difficult to access services locally. There's higher commuting distances, difficulty with health inequalities and so on. So the Plan Melbourne really tries to create a network of healthy and vibrant neighbourhoods, creating access to social infrastructure and helping to deliver local parks and green neighbourhoods. So it's a way of tackling not just supporting the vibrant neighbourhoods that are already there, but tackling some of the problems that exist in the outer-lying suburbs. Next slide. And we can see in our own closer to home, Glasgow City Plan highlights the importance of creating a network of thriving neighbourhoods, and it's one of 4 key strategic objectives linked to the plan's aim of compact growth. Next slide. So why now? So I think that the interest in the 20-minute concept clearly is linked to what's happened recently. There's a survey that's highlighted that 72% of Scottish employers expect an increase in demand for home working. 36% of those say that they'll be more likely to grant those requests, and a third say they expect to put in place new measures or investment to facilitate this, including local work hubs. We've seen a rise in cycling numbers through spaces for people and investment in active travel infrastructure. The kind of policy situation in relation to well-being, place, people is also linked to the creation of 20-minute neighbourhoods. And we're also seeing different wide-ranging economic impacts from COVID. And that recovery, green recovery, community services, small businesses, how our high streets operate is going to be a priority, as well as reimagining urban centres should the virus remain in circulation. However, all of these things, as the previous 2 presentations have talked about, are things that we would be wanting to look at in any case through tackling our net zero ambitions. And then transport is a major factor here. It's the largest greenhouse gas emitter, and a significant change in how and why people travel is a necessary response to the global climate emergency. Next slide. So that's all fed into programme for government and a focus on localism. and it's now embedded in various ways in the programme for government. And it's set out in a couple of quotes here, giving us a chance to radically rethink our places, where we live, our homes and our communities, and ensuring that communities can become vibrant hubs for people who live there, to workshop, learn, keep active and socialise. And then the second quote, it highlights the experience of living through lockdown and the idea that we will support 20-minute neighbourhoods where people can meet their needs within a 20-minute walk from their house to live better, healthier lives and support our net zero ambitions. Next slide. And that's fed through into a number of commitments. Some of these have been mentioned before about the importance of reducing transport demand and encouraging a modal shift away from private car use, and embedding the sustainable travel hierarchy that's been set in our national transport strategy. 500 million investment over 5 years for large-scale transformational active travel infrastructure. A review of Town Centre Action Plan is already underway, and that review will look at how 20-minute neighbourhoods can be adapted for our cities, towns and rural and island communities. A place-based investment programme has been established with investment of 275 million to support community-led regeneration, town centre revitalisation, including repurposing of buildings and reallocating external space and community-led land acquisition. And we're supporting efforts to progress a working local challenge to create more shared local working hubs for private, public and third sector in local towns. And all of our work to redesign our communities and respond to the pandemic is going to be underpinned by National Planning Framework 4, local development plans and local place plans, which I think are highly relevant to the delivery of 20-minute neighbourhoods. So next slide. That all feeds into how we deliver our national outcomes, supporting and enhancing community ownership, local choices and spaces, support of and growth of local businesses, the potential to support wider workplace and workforce shifts, as I've just been talking about. And apart from, the carbon benefits in reducing commuting, that may also release productivity gains. We've got, as I said, investment in active travel, and also a shift to mixed use developments. So there's lots of potential carbon and pollution benefits as well as enhanced wellbeing outcomes through looking at 20-minute neighbourhoods. So next slide. And here are some other examples of the links to 20-minute places and communities: smarter working, remote working, local hubs, spaces for people, economic development, planning policy, town centres, infrastructure investment, digital technology, and perhaps, as Heather was saying and Steve were saying through their presentation, it might support rural repopulation, but importantly, it's supporting our quality of life and social inclusion. So next slide. So the last couple of slides are really just an example of how to bring this to a local level. As an example, earlier this year, I was working on secondment with the City of Edinburgh Council, developing a local place plan for Wester Hailes. And this has shown how that 20-minute neighbourhood concept could apply to the centre of Wester Hailes, where there's already assets through things like the canal, the railway station. How can you enhance use of those assets, bring in new uses, new cycle routes, new activities, to create a better and diverse choice of activities, economy, and active travel opportunities, green space, food growing, all of that looked at holistically in and around education opportunities in and around the centre of Wester Hailes. And 20-minute neighbourhood concept can really help to drive the ideas around social connection, greener and cleaner places. So next slide. And I think also 20-minute neighbourhoods are a good way of linking thematic and spatial challenges and local and global issues. So one of the things we did in the local place plan in West Wales was look at the thematic challenges, the economic opportunities, and how that can be driven by 20-minute neighbourhoods, and how the global situation, the global impacts play out at a local level. And I think that's another way of looking at the 20-minute neighbourhood, as a way of delivering bigger thematic challenges, but played out at a local level and linking to sustainable development goals, our own national outcomes, as I've already talked about. So that's a quick run through. I've got a number of other points to make, but we're running out of time. So I will end my presentation there and look forward to some questions on the topic.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian. That was great. I loved how you took us from the international down to the local in terms of 20-minute neighbourhoods. So we've got some questions coming through on the chat, but I thought I'd take the liberty of being chair and ask a question first to all the panels. And it's sort of picking up on something that Ian said in his presentation about actually the concept being not a new idea, but with new significance. And I felt that that could run across all our things that we were talking about, be it carbon conscious or circular economy. And I just wondered, as a profession, since we're doing this for planning and partners, are we skilled up to deal with these new significant but not new concepts? And if not, what skills might we need? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite all the speakers to turn on their webcam, and then I'm going to eyeball somebody to be first to answer that question about, you know, what skills do we think we need? Steve's first up, and then Ian. Steve, do you want to give that a go?
No. I think the key to that is probably, looking at the place principle, working collaboratively, and I think we need more joined up approaches in our systems, which I think we're pursuing, but I think that translates into our places. Simple things like working collectively can probably have a massive impact, I think. So
good. That's good. Ian, do you want to give it a go in terms of what skills do we need, or are we skilled up enough?
Just try to work with it. Yes. Well, I think that we are moving towards that. I think that the kind of not working in silos, I think, is the key thing we need to do. And I think we were already trying to do that with tools like the place standards, applying the place principle. I think the good thing about 20-minute neighbourhoods as a concept, I think that people can understand and get to grips with. So I think that's useful in terms of communication between professionals and the public, in terms of trying to imagine or work out what is missing from an area, or what might, you know, be turned into an asset, and how, I suppose, it's made it personal, you know. If people haven't been commuting where we've got locked into that way of working, and have seen an alternative way of working, so I think we are learning. We've learned a lot. So it's about trying to, I suppose, you know, carry that kind of collaborative approach forward, and use, I think, some of the new techniques for collaboration that have been developed over the last few months, take those forward into the future.
Great. Angela and Ailey, do you have anything to add?
Want to go? Okay. Yeah, I was just going to agree with Ian. I think that as planners, we probably do have those skills. We're used to balancing different elements and kind of trying to join up systems, and it's just kind of taking it to the next level. And I guess it's all about collaboration, that kind of understanding the interconnections. And I guess it's just really making sure that we aren't designing in silos. So when we're designing an intervention at a place, it's just really making sure that we aren't designing for a single outcome, and that we're really thinking about how that works as a system and joining it up. I think we probably have the fundamental skills, and collectively, you know, as Scotland PLC, we can work together to deliver that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that as planners, we all do have the skills for this, and I don't think anything that any of us have talked about are new. We just haven't called them the circular economy or circular places or 20-minute neighbourhoods before. The biggest thing is probably being able to collaborate with each other. So local authority and public sector planners working with agencies and utilities and developers so that we can all work to deliver these great carbon conscious places. So it's maybe not necessarily skills, but the ability to collaborate that is the most important thing.
Great. No, I think that was coming through, collaboration being key. We've got an interesting question here from Julia Frost, and I'm going to direct it to Angela and Ailey because it's about circular economy. And she says, how does the increasing of rural Scotland help circular economy? So I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, you know, Ian touched about, you know, rural Scotland and 20-minute neighbourhood, but in terms of circular economy, any thoughts in terms of that?
Ailey, do you want to take that, or do you want me to have a go? Oh, I'm paused, so I don't know if you can still see me or hear me.
We can hear you and see you. Yep, you're not getting off scot-free.
It's all kind of frozen for me.
Ailey, do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I think the key thing is making sure that are being developed so that they have their own services. So a lot of the times we've seen services removed or taken away from rural locations, from rural populations, which means that people have to travel in order to get to a lot of the services, shops and offices that people need. So it is bringing communities are well served and that we plan to improve and enhance what's already there rather than perhaps looking at complete new settlements somewhere else or adding to places that are not sustainable in terms of just sort of ever increasing sort of urban creep. If Angela wants to add anything.
I kind of missed a little bit of what you were hearing because I was frozen, so apologies for that. But yeah, I think that we can go into the next. I'm conscious of time, so I'm happy that you've covered that off.
That was great. We've had an interesting question come in here from James Miller, who says, is there any conflict between the 20-minute neighbourhood approach and the existing town centre first principle? So I'm going to direct this to both Steve and Ian, because obviously Caring Places was focused around town centre living. And Ian, obviously you've just talked about 20-minute neighbourhood. And is there a conflict, or actually are they complementary?
Well, I think they're hugely complementary. You know, one of the you know, talking about the town centre first principle and investing in our existing places and investing in our town centres. The attractiveness of that is, you know, that's where all the services are. That's where all the public transport connections are. So I think they're natural places to be the kind of the hub of these 20-minute neighbourhoods. And I suppose, yeah, having more of these sort of urban connected neighbourhoods, I think they're really complementary. I'm interested to hear what Ian.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think we see them as complementary. You know, I think town centres are going to be a focus for 20-minute neighbourhoods or 20-minute places. I think there's already examples of how town centre first principle is, I suppose, bringing about places that are akin to 20-minute neighbourhoods. If you look at Paisley, you know, the investment in housing, cultural infrastructure, public realm that's going on there, or places like Dunfermline where you know, you've got really good cultural infrastructure, heritage, independent shops, music, you know, all of these things are sort of characteristics of 20-minute neighbourhoods. I think what we can do is look at other activities, housing, town centre living, and things like that. I think the big change also is travel. If there's less commuting, more people, you know, living and working locally, local work hubs, that could, you know, help to change our how our high streets operate. So I think they are complementary.
Brilliant. And I'm going to take a question here, but I'm going to slightly change it so you can all answer it. And it's a question about, obviously what we've heard is a lot about visions around placemaking. And I think the balance between what needs to be put in, policy, that sort of, advisory, and what needs to be embedded through statutory mechanisms. So in terms of delivering this, great, we've seen great vision, we know where we want to get to, but do we need statutory mechanisms to deliver it, or policy and that kind of nudging advisory? I think that goes across, and I'll maybe start with you, Steve, and then I'll work my way across.
Yeah, it's certainly a balance between the two, but I think it's interesting looking at how local police plans are coming forward, and I think certainly part of our work, Heather, having a user focus, so understanding the needs of the place, the needs of the people in the place. So I think that's really key to how we understand how to develop places and where to locate things, where to locate new housing. So I think I would hate to think that maybe some of the statutory things would get in the way of that, and there's this kind of balancing act as the kind of planning things are changing. So that's my thoughts on that.
Great. Ian, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think can be an alignment between, say, for example, the Planning Act from 2019, where you've got the chance to do local place plans. I gave the Wester Hailes example. Also, National Planning Framework will, the position statement will be coming out soon, but we kind of can look to that to set out some of the ambitions for, 20-minute neighbourhoods. And it's all about creating kind of, better, more vibrant places that again, is linked to services. And so I think there'll be opportunities there. And there's other things like the climate change, our ambitions on climate change, our national transport strategy, infrastructure investment. So there's some quite big sort of areas, not necessarily statutory, but kind of policy objectives that are kind of coming together, and hopefully the funding and investment, can deliver those in a kind of, as we're saying, in a holistic, non-siloized way.
Great. And Angela, Ailey, do you want to? Which one? Angela, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think in terms of kind of like enabling circular economy to kind of help that transition, then planning policy definitely has a role in kind of setting up the conditions to help enable that, but it's only part of the picture, and there's and we kind of need systemic. There's probably kind of like interventions across different elements. Things like building standards will be fundamental in helping us change that as well, and different funding mechanisms, and how the construction industry. So it's not just, planning's got its role in that, but it's going to be a lot wider. It's going to bring lots of different players into it. So I think, but we can, certainly it's kind of just setting the kind of parameters to start to make those decisions and make those changes. Ailey, do you have anything else to add on that?
Final word? No, nothing to add on that one. Well, I think we've come to the end of our session, and I'm glad we got through quite a few questions and managed to hear from all of you, because I find that really interesting and lots of kind of crossover. Before everybody logs off, I've just got a couple of things to mention. So everybody at this will receive an update email with access to all the recordings for the sessions over the week and copies of slides. So hopefully you'll be looking at those and sharing those around. After you log off this webinar, you'll get a few short questions, just how you found it. So please fill that in. We hope that you attend. Obviously, this is session 2, and there's still a lot to come. So we hope you sign up, and Susan's put the link to tomorrow's webinar in the chat, and so you sign up for the sessions coming up. It does look a great programme. So it's finally just for me to thank the speakers. I thought that was really great. I thought we all complimented each other and had slightly different, so I'm going to watch this back and see what I need to learn a bit more about. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for your questions. So that's just bye from me and bye from the speakers.
Okay, bye.
Too much.